Hello, welcome to this next video in the Ansible for Network Engineers series. And in today's video, I'm going to write a simple Ansible playbook that's going to back up a Cisco Nexus device. Now, in the previous video, we installed Ansible, and in this one, I'm going to do the very basic setup of Ansible, and then we're going to run that playbook. So it's going to be quite straightforward, but there are a few things that we need to do first. So here I am on my Ubuntu, and I need to activate my virtual environment so I can run Ansible. So I do source vm Ansible bin activate. So now this is my Ansible running. I just check we are good. So here we go. We've got Ansible 2.16 running here. Now there are a few things that you need to put into your Ansible server so you can connect to devices. And they are an Ansible config file, which is an Ansible config file. And you need that one to define some of the options, i.e. where the host file is, and you can specify keys and RSA issues, which I'll show you in a minute. The other thing is we need a host file. So it's a host file that just defines the devices and their IP addresses so you know where to connect to. And then we create a couple files which are variables so you can define passwords and criteria. So let's jump in. Okay, so the first file I'm going to create is the ansible.config file. And I'll tell you what I'll do. For this entire course, I'm going to create a folder, and let's put that right at the top. And we're going to create a new folder, call this Ansible for Network Engineers YouTube course. And then what I'll do is in the next video, I'm going to upload all of this to GitHub. We'll do a GitHub video and all the code will be there so you can follow along with that. So in here, I need a file called ansible.cfg, and all this does is define a few things which you'll see in a minute. So these are my defaults. Now what happens with the Ansible config file is this relates to everything within this folder. So all playbooks and things I run in the Ansible for Network Engineers YouTube course folder will be using this Ansible config file. And the only one I'm going to do first is to use the local hosts file in folder. This is a comment, and the command is this: inventory equals /hosts. So this is saying that the inventory for this folder lives in a file called hosts. So we're going to create that one as well. So this is just called hosts, and in the host file you define things in groups. So I'm going to create a group here. This is called Nexus, and then my device name is going to be NX9KV-1, and then I call Ansible host equals 192.168.1.150. So that is telling Ansible I have a host called NX9KV1 and its IP address is this. If you had DNS running, you don't need this. So if you can resolve that name from within Ansible, you don't need this, but I've got this in a lab and this is not resolvable at the moment. So that will satisfy my hosts. Back into the Ansible config, and I need to do a couple more. So this one is do not gather facts. So Ansible, when it was created, was designed to, it still does, manage Linux servers, and it runs the playbooks on the actual Linux server, and it can gather facts about that device. But as we're running these playbooks, they actually run locally on the Ansible server, and then just SSH into a network device, we don't need to bother gathering facts. So you can say gathering equals explicit, and that will stop fact gathering. And the other one I'll do in the lab is don't worry about RSA fingerprints. So this is what I do just to keep the RSA warnings away for the lab devices. So this basically says if a device pops up and says, do you trust this fingerprint? Instead of having to go in and say, yes, I trust the fingerprint for that device, it will just automatically accept the device. So that's all I need in my Ansible config. All I need in my host file is this. And then we also need a folder called group vars and another folder. Let's just do an all.yaml in the group vars, and we'll do a nexus.yaml as well, which I'll explain later. And we also need a folder called host vars. So, and I've put that in the wrong place. Let's delete the host vars. The host vars, the group vars, it needs to go into there. Host vars. Did I create a file or a folder? I created a file, sorry. New folder. That's it, host vars. Okay, so in my group vars, let's put to there. I've got a group vars, so this is group variables, and these are variables that will be relevant for all devices. Anything you put in the Nexus file, that will be variables that are relevant just for my Nexus devices. And then finally, host vars, you can get into a device specific and specify elements in that device configuration that you want just for that device. For now, we're just going to go into the all.yaml file, and we need to specify the connection details of how we're going to connect to our device. Now, I'll paste these in and then explain what they all mean. So these are my default login details for all devices. So when Ansible connects to a device, it will start at the top and it will check in the all folder for credentials. It will then get into the group specific, and then it will get into host vars. So we're going to say, just for the moment in this lab, all devices will have the username of Roger, the password of Cisco1234. The Ansible Network OS is iOS, and the Ansible connection is a network CLI. So that's going to be our default option to connect to all devices. Depending on what device you want to connect to, you can actually specify in here, instead of putting iOS, I'll paste in the entire range. So these are all the possible devices currently within Ansible that you can connect to. So if you've got an Aruba, you would specify this in here. Well, you wouldn't put it in the all variables. You would go have a group variables called Aruba, and in there you'd specify that. And I'll show you how that works, because the one we want is Nexus, so that's NXOS. So my all group, this will be any device that is not specified further down the list. So the default is going to be iOS. Let's take this and we're going to the Nexus group. So this is going to be specific values just for Nexus. Now, if I put all these in here, the ones that are common, the username and password in my lab will be the same. The network connection will be the same, but the network OS is going to be NXOS. So we'll specify that in there. So that's it. We're set up now. We have the Ansible config file. This is pointing Ansible to our host file. Our host file has the name and the IP address of our Nexus switch. We have our group vars folder, which contains the connection credentials and the type of device we're connecting to. And the Nexus specific group has the Nexus OS specified as the Ansible Network OS. So now we can write the playbook. Okay, so to create the playbook, we're going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this backup.yml. So this is our playbook to back up a Nexus device. So up here, 3 dashes for a YAML file. Now, if you've never written an Ansible playbook before, I'm writing this in a YAML format. So this is a markup language, which is quite easy to write. It's human readable, so pretty much once this is done, you'll be able to go through it. The only problem with YAML is that it's very sensitive to the indentations. So pay attention to the indentations that I'm doing and where everything sits. So the name of this is to back up Nexus devices. Then you specify, so you can see there I did 2 spaces and then hosts. So the first one is a name. This is literally saying the name of the playbook. The hosts that I'm going to run them across are Nexus. Now that value, Nexus, is pulled from our inventory, which is in our hosts file, and that's there. So that's the group Nexus. So this playbook, backup Nexus devices, is going to reference all the devices in the Nexus group here. Now this inventory could have tons of stuff in it. We could have 100 servers in here. I could put F5 devices in here and they would all be listed, and I can reference each one by the name that is there. So back into the playbook. So the host is Nexus. That's the devices I want to target. And then you do the tasks. So these are the tasks that I actually want to perform. 2 more spaces in, a dash and a name. And this is going to say backup Nexus switches. Now, this point, we are going to use what they call an Ansible module. Now, a module is basically a Python script. All those scripts have been written and preloaded. If they're not available, you can go into something called Ansible Galaxy and pull them down. We'll go into much more detail on that later in the course. But for now, you just need to know that we're going to use the Cisco.nxos config module. So this is just utilizing some already written code that someone's put in. It's available to use, and it handles all the heavy lifting on how to connect to a Nexus device and how to run the commands. We put backup true, and then we've got backup options. Now, if you wonder how I know all this stuff, it's very easy to find. You can just Google the Cisco NXOS module. First hit will be the Ansible documentation, and this tells you all about the Cisco NXOS config module. And come down to the bottom, and there are a few examples of ways to configure a Nexus device. And what I'm actually referencing is this bit here, which is the backup function of the config module. So there are other things here you can do to actually make a configuration. We're just using it to do a backup today. So within there, the backup options that I want to use are 2. One is the file name. So 2 more indents there. And I'm going to use a variable here. This is an Ansible variable called the inventory host name. So what that does is that picks out the inventory host name, which is in the host file. So this name here. So that value there can be referenced in the playbook here. So that will be replaced with NX9KV1. And we're going to add onto that backup.txt. And that is the file name that's going to be created. So when this backs up, it's going to create a file called nx9kv1-backup.txt. And the final option is the dir path. So that's the directory path. Where do we want to put it? And I'm going to put it into a folder called backups. Now that doesn't exist at the moment. So let's create that folder. Backups. So just to recap, we have set up the Ansible config file, set the host file up, set the group variables up, set the connection method up, and now I've written the first playbook. And this is going to back up the Nexus device and save the configuration into the backups folder. Now, just to show, I've got the, this is the Nexus 9KB that I configured. And there's nothing on here. It's pretty much an empty switch. So you can see that. So let's run the playbook. So to run the playbook, all you have to do is type Ansible-playbook and then the name of the playbook. So backup.yml. This should work. If it doesn't work, we can fix it. Okay, silly mistake. I'm not in the folder that I created, so let's move into the Ansible for Network Engineers YouTube course folder. And there's the playbook there, so I can run it again. Ansible-playbook backup.yml. Okay. Now, Ansible will give you errors and it will tell you what's going wrong. So let's have a look. Get rid of some of these options. Oh, cleared it. Let's run that again. Ansible Engineers YouTube course. Ansible Playbook. Backup.ym. Oh, hold on, I've dropped out of my my environment. So source VM Ansible /bin/ wait. That's better. YouTube course. Right, we're back on track. Ansible Playbook. So what happened there was because I dropped out of the terminal window, I dropped out of my virtual environment and I didn't have Ansible installed on the main machine. It was only installed within the virtual environment. So we're back in there now. Okay, so we fixed the problem there. The inventory underscore hostname, the value should have been inventory underscore, not inventory dash hostname. So let's run this now. Okay, now next error, this you will get the first time you run Ansible. It will say that Ansible pylib SSH is not installed. That is easily fixed with pip install Ansible pylib SSH. That's the Python library that connects to the devices. That will download pylib.ssh. Now this playbook should run. And we see there that something changed. We've got a yellow, so the first time you run a playbook, it will run yellow, and that means that something has changed. I can run it again. And it will show now. Ansible has a thing called idempotency, where if something doesn't change, it doesn't make the run and it goes green. With backing up a config, you actually also end up backing up a clock variable, which makes the text in there slightly different, so it keeps this as yellow. But we've backed up, so let's have a look in the folder structure now. Remember, I created the folder called backups, and now we have a file in here called n9kv1 backup, and in there, let's open this up, we have the running configuration of that device. Now that is a very simple Ansible playbook that shows you how to back up a Nexus device. This can obviously be scaled for massive scale. So if we had 1,000 devices in our host file and I ran this, so within this host file, if there was 1,000 of these, Ansible would just chug away and it would back up 1,000 devices for me. So that shows you the power of Ansible and a very first simple playbook. So I hope that was of some benefit, and in the next video I'm going to do a quick intro to GitHub. We're going to upload this configuration into GitHub so you can have access to it. And my name is Roger Perkin, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care. Thank you. Bye.